Hello everybody, I would like to share one more article from Philip O'Brien about the way that how Trump and Putin might be aligning, and he illustrates it on them aligning on the position of Ukrainian elections. So let's read it. I have received some interesting responses to my weekend update arguing that Trump and Putin are aligning on Ukraine and on Europe. That piece, link below, seems too strong to some who did not like or accept the fact that Trump and Putin could actually be cooperating in the way suggested. So here is a link to his previous article that I have discussed and shared in my previous video. I will the link to this article will be in the description, so you can read it yourself. To try and illustrate how they could be aligning, I thought I would provide an example of one of the more fascinating examples of what seemed clearly like message coordination, or more accurately, the Trump administration adopting the Putin position word for word. That example is the increasingly strident US calls for Ukraine to have an election very soon. Also, I will keep this piece free for everyone as it builds on the weekend update. So most of the posts by Philip O'Brien are behind the paywall, but some of them are actually available in full and not just a preview. Okay. Before Trump was elected, a non-issue, so non-Ukrainian elections were non-issue before Trump was elected for his policy. Prior to Trump's election in November 2024, there had been a great deal of talks of different Trump peace plans for Ukraine. Settling the war was one of his key foreign policy pledges, and there ended up being many ideas floated around by those close to Trump. In particular, we had different peace plans or ideas floated by Kit Kellogg, now Ukraine Special Envoy, and J.D. Vance, now Vice President, as well various mutterings by Trump himself. So this is a picture of Trump and Kellogg. What is interesting is that in none of them was Ukraine having an elections a major issue. Indeed, it's hard to even find it being mentioned. Let's start with Kellogg plan, co-authored with Fred Fleitz and released by the America First Policy Institute in April 2024. And in the article there is a link to the whole plan. It's a relatively lengthy piece, thousands of words with footnotes. It was easily the most detailed peace plan released by anyone close to Trump before the elections, and covered so many points that I actually wrote a Substack about it. And then there is a link to this piece. What you will find at no point in this piece is a call for or even a mention of a Ukrainian election as part of the process of this peace plan. I did a word search. Election shows up once in the whole text in the title of a cited piece which discusses elections in Poland and Slovakia. Same with what, nothing about Ukraine having to have one. So no calls or thoughts of an elections from Kellogg. The same seems to be the case for J.D. Vance. Now Vance did not have one definite peace plan before the election, but was easily one of the most critical voices of the Republican Party towards Ukraine and Zelensky. Indeed, he had so many criticisms that the different sources ran pieces on all of them. So meaning they fact-checked him. Vance was basically looked for an excuse to go after Zelensky in particular, even spreading the baseless Kremlin-inspired lie that Zelensky had bought a yacht with US aid money. And then there is a link to the article that discusses this and other Vance position on Ukraine. During the campaign, Vance was more explicit in his ideas on how to end the war, again putting across a plan that would have given Putin basically everything the Russian dictator could have wanted, with one exception. There was no talks on making Ukraine have an election as part of the peace process. Nor does it seem did Trump say anything about Ukraine having an election. Now, Trump never put forward a concrete plan to end the war, except to say he could do it in 24 hours. Yet, even when Trump went on his most anti-Ukraine rants, like he did in this September peace, he never mentioned forcing an election on Ukraine. So Trump, Vance, and Kellogg, the three people who said the most about Ukraine in 2024 from the inside, seemed to think Ukraine elections were unimportant enough to mention. It was a non-issue. That was very different than the Russian position. Since Ukrainian elections have been postponed due to the war, which is entirely legal in Ukraine under martial law, the Russian government has called Zelensky illegitimate and pushed for a vote for a number of reasons I will describe below. In fact, Putin has made a point of personally stressing this. He has always said he could only sign a peace deal after a Ukrainian election, for instance, during the visit to China in May 2024. His exact words were, "If it comes to signing documents, we should sign those documents in such a critical area with the legitimate authorities." So it's been a big deal for Russia while being non-existent for the Trump camp. And then everything changed after the election. After the election, it became a central issue. Contacts between Trump and Putin seemed to start almost immediately after Trump was elected. No one knows how often the two of them spoke or their intermediaries. But it is important to see what has changed since they started changing ideas. When it comes to the Trump peace plan to end the fighting, the amazing thing is how the non-issue of elections in Ukraine have now become vital. The first one to call for this fascinatedly was Kellogg, the person who wrote the most detailed peace plan before the US election, which had no mention of needing a Ukrainian vote, now became all hot and bothered that Ukraine had not had a vote. Starting around 1st February, he began pressing the case publicly. Most democratic nations have elections in their time of war. I think it is important they do so, Mr. Kellogg told the Reuters news agency. He added, "I think it's a good for democracy. Then the beauty of a solid that's the beauty of a solid democracy. You have more than one person potentially running." Okay. Since then, Kellogg has come back to the Ukrainians needing to have elections a number of times in even more strident terms. Indeed, though Kellogg was aware that such elections are now illegal under Ukrainian law, he said that Ukraine should have them anyway. And I will tell you that there are several issues with this in our laws. It is expressly forbidden to have it during the war, during the martial law, during war times, to have an election. So we cannot do it without changing constitution, and there is no way we can change constitution. And during wartime, there is no way to change constitution. You cannot change constitution during wartime. During the martial law, it is expressly forbidden to change constitution, so that nobody can. It is a precaution that some guy announced martial law and then changes constitution in his favor. No, we cannot do that. It is a precaution against dictatorship. Okay. And he changed his earlier statement that most democratic nations have wartime elections now to everyone had elections, which is laughably ignorant. Look at the UK in the world wars. Here's what he said to Newsmax. Kellogg stressed that every democratic country has elections, pointing out that the United States has held elections even during times of war. I would say that, remind me, during which war 20% of territory of United States was held by some occupation force from other country, not the civil war, okay. Okay, they can't right now because it's in their constitution. The Ukrainians may not be able to hold elections until hostilities cease, but at some point they will need to. And this is a sign of healthy democracy, Kellogg said. And we will have elections. We will have elections within 90 days, I think, after the martial law ends. Trump also has decided that Ukraine must have a vote, when before he could not care less. Not long after he announced that he has spoken to Putin, Trump also called for Ukrainian presidential elections. And in this case, he went further and actually talked down Zelensky as re-election possibility. So he was putting possibility for Zelensky to get re-elected as a very slim, as doubtful. He's going to have to do what he has to do. This the way he expresses himself, Trump, it's really, really dumb. It seems to get really dumb. He's going to have to do what he has to do. Trump said of Zelensky needing to cede territories. But the poll numbers aren't particularly great, to put it mildly. So he's actually, I think, the Russians for some time now are saying that Zelensky is not held in elections because he's afraid that he will lose. And he is actually prolonging the war to keep himself in power, because if there is elections, he will lose. Maybe it is right that he will lose, but what he's saying, Kellogg, right now is actually just regurgitating the Russian propaganda. Not Kellogg. Trump is actually regurgitating in some way Russian propaganda. But his poll numbers aren't particularly great, saying he. By the way, that's not true. Even after a dip, Zelensky popularity ratings in Ukraine are higher than Trump's in America. Now, the Ukrainians have smelled a rat on this. They see Trump and his people now vociferously taking a position that Putin has long had and trying to force it on Ukraine. Indeed, it's a little reach to require Ukraine to have a vote when Putin rules as a dictator whose rule is continued because of completely bogus elections. So, they are accepting his view that he is legitimate after he has not participated in fair elections, probably since the very first elections when he was elected because of his strongman position and he started a war with Chechnya. And after that, there were no fair elections there. And on these first elections, the opposition people like Nemtsov, who was then killed by Putin, they were rooting for Putin. They were thinking that he is lesser evil than communists. Why this shift? Why has Trump taken so much of a more pro-Kremlin stance since the election? I think it is the best example of how Trump and Putin are actually aligning and are working together to achieve similar goals. Trump's crack about Zelensky poll ratings is illuminating and the best place to start. Trump and Putin both seem to want Zelensky out and at the same time to weaken Ukrainian society cohesion. I'm not sure I pronounced it correctly. They also want to establish a clear example of how the areas of Ukraine illegally occupied by Russia should no longer be considered Ukraine. Remember, Trump has now come out and said Ukraine will have to give up this territory. So, I mean, if Ukrainians are not allowed to vote on the territories that are occupied by Russia, it just confirms that that these territories are not part of Ukraine, and just normalize this position. Any election campaign right now would also be almost impossible to run. For instance, what would happen to the massive Ukrainian diaspora which left the country when the war started? Even more difficult are all the Ukrainians in occupied territories, which Russia has illegally annexed. There is no way Putin would allow a Ukrainian vote in land he controls. And if that land is taken out of an election, it would establish a terrible precedent. Moreover, an election in such fraught conditions would allow for massive instability. The Russians have already shown an extraordinary ability to influence votes and run shadow candidates in normal elections. In a chaotic wartime one, it would be a mess. It's also not clear how it could be run. Would Russia cease all attacks during it? Unlikely, in parentheses. Indeed, it would allow the Russians the ability to take advantage of Ukraine being distracted by internal campaigning to cause even more mayhem. Imagine running a campaign with masses of Shaheds attacking your city every night. That's actually really a dream of Putin that we forgot about, we Ukrainians, forgot about opposing him, about defending ourselves and start, reaping at each other during election, because it is very, very contentious issue. And there are quite a lot of disappointment in Zelensky and people around him. And it is a way, but we are not doing anything about that because we have a war going on right now. And this idea to have such a strife, such an argument inside our country during the war, it is the dream of Putin. So asking for elections, he's actually helping Putin to divide Ukraine and to weaken Ukraine from within. Trump. Okay, so the Trump shift seems designed to get rid of Zelensky and weaken Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have finally seemed to understand that. I've been told that one of the reasons for the strong shift in the last few days is that the Ukrainians believe that Trump is out to weaken them for Putin's sake. It's why more and more the Ukrainians understand that if they are to keep their democracy and freedom, it will be with the aid of Europe and not that of the United States of America. Certainly, what we can say is that in every instance since the elections, when Trump has changed, it has been in a way that favors Putin. The election issue might be the most striking, but it's hardly alone. The G7 statement, the moves towards economic cooperation, the calls for Ukraine to cede territory, the attempts to keep Europeans out of the negotiation over the future of Ukraine, etc. It looks very much like a coordinated campaign to me. And all of these steps have one goal in mind: to strengthen Russia and weaken Ukraine. I completely agree with his analysis. So the link to this article will be in the description. Thank you for watching and till next time.